Hello, this is Mike at GameFromScratch, and welcome to a quick hands-on with GameMaker. Now, Yo-Yo Games, the makers of GameMaker, just released GameMaker 2.0 a couple of weeks back, and I decided to take a hands-on look with this game engine. Now, this isn't a full, closer look at. This is a much quicker, more abridged version of it. If you do want to see me go into more depth, do let me know down below, and I can do so. I just decided, I've long since been overdue looking at GameMaker. It's a very popular game engine, often either beloved or reviled by the game development community, and I never really took the time to look into it to see what it's all about. So I've been spending the last couple weeks playing around with the free version of it that's available for download. And let's start off right there. Now, GameMaker is a commercial game engine. That means there is a price tag attached to it. And as I said, there is a free version, but you're not going to be able to do anything commercial with it. So this is definitely a pay-to-play engine. If you want to publish a game, you've got to pay for it. Now let's talk quickly about price. And I've got nothing personally wrong with charging for software. I make my living making software, so obviously I like the ability to charge for it. Now, of course, there are free options out there, and why you would choose one or the other is really a decision up to you. But do be aware of this price tag. Now, as I said, there is a trial version available. I found it's got probably 90% of the functionality of the full version. There's a few things I haven't been able to get in and see. I don't believe I can create shaders. I obviously can't publish for anything. And you're locked down with the samples that you can load, and you also can't bring in extensions. So it's not the full program by any means, but it is most of it. So you do get a pretty good idea of what you're getting into. Otherwise, you're looking at $100. US dollars to get the desktop publishing ability. That gives you the ability to publish for Windows, Mac, and Ubuntu. Now, do keep in mind the GameMaker tools, however, are only available on Windows. You might be able to run it under Wine or Parallels, but I don't know either way. I never looked into it, but you can basically think of GameMaker as Windows only or Windows primary development software. So obviously that's going to be a deal breaker to some of you. But in terms of platforms it can target, there's quite a few, but they have price tags attached, as you can see by this chart in front of you. So if you want to target web, you need to buy it, $150. UWP or Universal Windows Platform, which is kind of the replacement for Windows RT or Windows Metro. This is the right ones run on all Windows platform, Windows Phone, Windows Desktop, Xbox One. That publishing ability is a very steep, in my humble opinion, $400. There is mobile publishing, which gives you iOS and Android, also for $400. And then PS4 and Xbox One publishing is coming soon. So the more platforms you add, obviously, the more expensive GameMaker gets. If you're just developing for Windows, it's a fairly affordable piece of software, and then as you start adding more platforms, it does get more expensive, especially if you are a hobbyist. If you're not in this for the money per se, this could be a painful little pinch. Now, of course, if you are making money off this and making substantial money off this, this is pretty much nothing, especially if you're paying out wages. So, it all kind of depends on your situation there. All right, that's it for pricing. Let's go jump right in. Now, if you do want to grab GameMaker, just come on in here, hit the Get GameMaker button. Ironically brings you back to here. There is a version of, click here in the trial version. Got to log in and register. Go ahead and download it. And like I said, it's a pretty much full version of GameMaker. And then once you fire it up, here is GameMaker with one of the available templates running. This is a platforming template, and you can kind of get a gist of how GameMaker is arranged. The UI is a little interesting. They've done this sort of virtualized desktop thing up here, and it works pretty well on a monitor. It works like absolute crap on my high DPI desktop, like on my laptop. On the high DPI display, it's terrible. And when I tried to calibrate it, I actually managed to lock myself out of GameMaker. I had to do a complete uninstall, reinstall. I couldn't get back to the settings to change the high DPI back. And at the same time, when I hook up a monitor that is not high DPI, it's been a nightmare. So their DPI stuff could definitely use some work. And I also found that if I didn't disable DPI scaling, the fonts were borderline illegible. Now, this isn't going to apply to a lot of people, but if you are working on a laptop with a high DPI display, it is a frustrating application to use. You got to basically choose between squinting and barely being able to see anything, or scaling in which the UI doesn't work for crap, especially when you get into the settings type stuff. So that's definitely a caveat I had, but for the most part, it's a very clean display going on here. You can save and load set layouts. You can reset your layout back to normal after the fact. And you'll notice you can actually expand to just what you're working on, or you can bring in and out these sidebars. You can also do that manually over here. There. And then there's a bottom one that we're not seeing with most of your settings, etc. Run your code. Just go ahead, press the play button. It does its compile, and we'll give it a second. There's your game running. So pretty good compile loop speed going on there. Let's just shut that down. And you'll see the majority of what's going on here. We can see our world. Over here, here are the various resources that go into creating your actual game. This is where you organize your images, such as sprites, tile sets, which is used to paint your background map in individual chunks. Very common game dev system. If you've ever used the tiled editor, you know exactly what we're dealing with here. So there's a built-in tiled editor in here, and it's actually pretty comprehensive. It's got support for things like auto tiling, etc. We'll see that in a moment. You got your scripts over here. You've got two ways of programming in GameMaker. There's drag and drop, and then there's straight out scripting in GML. As far as I can tell, GML is basically C-Lite. It's a very straightforward scripting language, but it is unfortunately a proprietary scripting language as well. But if you've ever done any C or JavaScript programming, it'll be immediately obvious to you. Now, there are some things in there that I found kind of hackish, things like parameter 1 through 16 being automatically defined, global variables that just should not exist, etc. Now, GameMaker's been around for a number of years, so there is going to be a lot of legacy cruft, and there are some design decisions that make me, as a Puritan, go, ugh. But for the most part, it's a pretty clean, pretty easy to understand scripting language. It's pretty easy to pick up. I'd rather they didn't go and roll their own. I kind of hate when game engines do this, and yes, that applies to Godot as well. I would rather see them use an off-the-shelf language. However, what they have created isn't that hard to learn, and as I said, we'll see it in a little bit. And you got other pieces that go together. Now, the big one is going to be probably objects. Now, objects is basically where you take a resource and the logic and you kind of throw them together. It's through objects that we're going to apply code to our actual entities in the game. And then everything's sort of arranged over here. You can see layers. Now, if you've ever worked in like a Photoshop type environment, this is sort of just like that. So you can see we've got different layers here. We've got a layer for the player. We've got a layer for collisions, controls, tiles, as I was mentioning earlier. So here's the tile layer. I can go ahead and turn that off and you'll see the effect. So all the different tiles that we drew are gone. You can turn that back on. Same with your ghosts. We can turn them off and on. And then the individual ghosts themselves, you'll see if I select one of them, which I can't. All right, select it over here. This is an example of an object. And as I was saying earlier, they've this sort of virtualized workspace desktop. And then you saw it opened up right here. So let's see how I've got workspace open. We can create multiple workspaces that we can work with, but it's in here. So we've got here some code that was opened up earlier. All of your stuff is sort of created in this virtualized desktop. And once again, you can click this guy and get a much more streamlined view of what you're dealing with. And so here you can see an object. And an object, as I said, is one ties all these things together. So you've got here, it's got a sprite attached to it. So you click here and you could choose your different sprites. So they picked an enemy, the ghost sprite. So that's how you would link the image up to the object we've got. We've also got event. Now, event is essentially how you link up programming to this guy. So we see here we've got an event, and we've got a number of credits. So we've got a create event, a step event, and a draw event. So I'm going to go ahead and show you add event. Here's all the various different events you can add in. Now, just like any game engine, there is a game loop behind the scenes, and it loops through and it does all these various different pieces. Like so, at the very beginning, it creates, that's pre-loop actually, and then each pass through the loop. Step is called, draw is called, various inputs are handled, collision detection is done, gesturing support, networking, all this stuff is like updated each pass through the loop, and you basically respond to those events, and that's how you link up logic to your particular game. So here's the logic for create, for example. And it's just basically setting a bunch of variables for that particular object. Now, there's different scoping rules, just like any programming language for the most part. There's different scoping rules and how variables work inside of GameMaker. And these ones are, so you can see there's no declaration. They're basically just dir equals choose speed equals 3. So you're basically setting, like here, we set a variable of speed equals 3. So the value of that variable speed, SPD, is now 3. Now these variables are going to be available all across the instance of this object. So we have OGhost. All these variables are set for OGhost. So we come down here, say, for example, look at step. Yeah, let's go to draw. All right, they didn't actually use any of these variables at any point in time. But they could be used at different sections or different periods in the lifetime of responding to events of this object. And so this is kind of how the coding works. Now there's also the drag and drop option. And again, I'll get a little bit into both of those as we go forward. So that is how an entity would be created. And then you could just basically, so here's the ghost layer added. I could come over here to resources, pick object, grab my ghost, and I can create one in the world like that. So that's how simple it is to go about, populating said world. Your organization is dialed down here. Here are your instances of said object. So I basically just created a new one when I drag that off. So I can grab an individual instance this way, and it'll automatically bring it down to it. And at this point, we can also create variables at the instance level. So you've got the object level and you've got the instance level. So the object is Ghost, and then these are all the various different instances of Ghost, or a singular implementation of the Ghost class. If you come from a C++ background, it's like, sort of like you have the object and then you have the instances of the object, or same as Java, C#, etc. GameMaker is no different in that regard. So you can see you can come down and do settings on the actual instance. We can go in and actually edit the object. So this is back to the parent class. So this is the object that instance is inherited from. We can do individual creation code for that particular instance. So this code and these variables would only apply to that one particular Ghost. And then ultimately, that's kind of the crux of how GameMaker games are structured. And we're going to start this from the very beginning. We'll do a quick one in drag and drop, and then we'll go back and we'll do a little bit more in the coding version, so you can have an idea how it works. Now, the nice thing is you can actually mix and match between the coding and the drag and drop. So if you prefer one, you can go one route. If you prefer the other, you can go the other route. Or if you prefer both, you can switch back and forth. There's also the ability to actually compile the drag and drop code into somewhat human readable script. So you can actually switch back and forth if you prefer at a later date. So that is that. I seem to have lost my side. One second. All right, so we're back. Now the heart of it is rooms. You can basically think of GameMaker as room-based. You probably have to have at least one room. There might be a way code-wise to get around this, but room is ultimately the level, the organizational unit of your game. So it could be the level, it could be a title screen, it could be the end credits, whatever, but you're breaking your game down into room. And a room is a container for all the various elements that actually go together to make up your game. So that's it for an overview. Let's actually jump in and actually see how things work in action. So we're going to, as I said earlier, we're going to start off with a drag and drop project. So without further ado, let's jump straight in, take a look at the game development process from scratch using the drag and drop interface, so you can get an idea of just exactly how it is like working from the very beginning with GameMaker. So let's fire a new copy up. One of the nice things I do like about GameMaker is you can have multiple instances of it running. I hate when game engines don't permit you to do this. And here we are. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to create a new project. We'll create a drag and drop project. Now, as I said earlier, you can actually mix and match them. So it's not really that big of a decision up front. I'll call this YouTube DD demo. And welcome to our new project. Right off the hop, you don't have a lot going on. You can see over here, we've got our resources that we're going to work with for our game. And it does by default create a room for us. And again, a room is the fundamental building block of your game. So let's start off there. We're going to say, I don't know, let's play a sound effect or some music when our game starts up. So we're going to take this a little bit incrementally. So first things first, we're actually have to go ahead and create or import a sound. You're going to see there's a lot of this. You import the asset and then do something with it. So go ahead and create a sound effect. You see it brings up this window inside of our workspace over here that we can work with. You can zoom in and out. The font quality isn't the greatest at non-standard zoom levels, but you can do so. So go ahead and we'll just bring in some assets I have from an existing pack. Let's see, some sound effects, music pack. All right. We'll bring in this MP3 file. So now that I brought it in, so there you can hear the sound effect being played. We'll call that music. It is, so you got also the choice of how to deal with it. So you can have it compressed, streamed. You can have it uncompressed, take up a lot of memory. And generally what happens is short burst, often used sound effects will be uncompressed, and larger things such as the one we just created here will be compressed. You've got choice between stereo, mono, etc. And I think we're good here. So that should automatically save. Close that down. So now here we are in our room. So bring up the room. It brings up the room editor. This is pretty much your map. So we saw this earlier, a fully fleshed out version. Let me bring that back up. Here we go. See, here is a fully involved one with all the various different layers that go together to compose that particular room. Well, here is an empty one. So you got a background image layer, so you could bring in a single image or a color. So we could set the background of our world right here, if we so wished. And that's really hard on the eyes. Let me undo that. Or you can bring in a single background images to affect, or pretty much however you want to work with that there. But this is your level, your screen, your whatever you want to figure it out as. But the key thing that we want to come in here for is creation code. And this is the one thing you can do with a room. Basically, when the room is created, run this code. And let's go ahead and call in that creation code. And you can see a little bit of how the drag and drop programming works. So this is the on creation code call. So this code is going to run when the creation code is executed. So when the room is created, we're going to go ahead and run this. And you'll see down here on the side, we've got the various different building blocks or programming blocks for visual drag and drop programming. So in this case, all we're going to do is play that song when we start. So come in here. So you've got play audio. Drag that over here. It's going to ask you for which audio effect. We'll bring in music that we just did. Do we want to loop it or no? We can target it at something in the scene if it makes sense to do so. In this case, it doesn't. So now we go ahead and run our game. And when it starts up, it's going to automatically go ahead, create that room. That room is going to call that creation code. That creation code is in turn going to call that code. And as you can see, it plays our sound effect. So that's the basics of the coding style for drag and drop. We'll look at a little bit more complicated version later on. We've got loops, we've got switches, we've got various different data structures available to you. Buffering files, camera control, room control. So if you want to switch to next room or next screen, you can do it using these. You've got conditionals. You've got most of what you would use in a traditional programming, just using these building blockish structures. We can also build in if conditionals, so like if this, then that, and then have code branch off of that. But let's move on to a little bit more of the level design and what we do to actually create our game. So let's go back to our, let's go back up. Let's see, here, room editor, there it is. So I do find this desktop a little confusing sometimes for actually figuring out where things are. So this virtual workspace thing, it's kind of cool in that, here's the painting area and there's the coding area, and they're all kind of together in this one big workspace, but I also find it a little confusing at times, to be honest, too. So now let's go ahead and actually create a map. We can start with one big background, but instead what I'm going to do is create a tile map. So bring tile maps in. Again, same sort of concept. You got to create the raw asset to work with and then create the derived asset from it. So what we're going to first need is actually an image that composes our tile map. So we come up here to sprites, right click, create. And then once again, I'm grabbing, so there is an image editor built in that I did not really want. So let's just close that down. I'll bring our sprite back up. Okay, what I wanted to do was import. But as you saw, there are tools directly built in here. So there you saw there was a direct image editor built in. We're not going to really cover that today. Let's go on back up here, bring in a tile. So tile packs. I'll bring in this tile set, like so. We'll call it tiles, so that makes sense. And you can see there's actually quite a bit going on in this particular sprite editor. We can set its pivot point here. We can have how the collision masks are set up on it, the different settings for collisions on it. But in this case, we're bringing in just this raw image to work with to make our tile sets. So let's go ahead, and we're good now. So we've got our tiles. Now we're going to go ahead and create a tile set. So go ahead and create. Pick your sprite, which is the tiles we just brought in. Now you'll notice it's not lining up right because this is by default 16 by 16, but our tile set is 32 by 32. So we just got to go ahead and change that out. So now we've got our tile set available to draw with. Now another cool thing we can do here, and I'll do this while we're in here, is you can actually do tile animations. So what I'm going to do here is create a new animation, set number of frames. So let's see if I can do this directly. So I'm just going to use this 2. Set number of frames is 2. So we got a 2-frame tile animation. There. So we've got this very, very primitive fire animation. It's not 15 frames a second because we've only got 2 frames. So let's do it 2 frames a second. And then you can see the animated effect. Obviously, if you had an ocean with a bunch of different tiles, you'd get a much smoother result than I got there. But you see, you can actually directly create these tile animations. And as you see, again, it's coming off of this generalized workspace. So You may like it, you may not. I'm still kind of undecided on how this is, in my opinion, for working around. But as you see, built right into the tileset editor, there is tile animations. You've got brush builders. We've actually got auto tiling too, which allows it to use algorithms to automatically bend corners and make transitions, etc. if you set it up correct. But way beyond the scope of what we're going to deal with here. If you do want more information on that, I actually did a tutorial on tiled, which shows auto tiling in effect. So you can check that video out. It's the same basic concept. All right, so we have our tiles, our source image, we have our tile set. So now we're going to go on back to our room, as you can see here, and we are going to paint. So what we need to do now is create a new tile layer. So we've got our tile layer now. We need to bring in a tile set, which we just created, and now we can draw our world. So let's start off with a raw fill. So we'll do a fill. We'll use this tile. And then boom. So there's our base map in the background. And now you can just kind of come in and, oops, I'm still in fill mode. Draw various different tiles in your world, like so. I'm not putting any thought into this, but this was how you would potentially paint your map. Now, don't forget, you can also create a number of different layers here for things like you could have just had a background image. So you could have your clouds in the background. They don't need to be tiles. So you can sort of mix and match however you want it to be. But as you saw, we just basically set up a level. You painted it quickly with tiles. There was a couple other things down here you probably didn't see. You can set up physics on it, the camera settings, etc. A little unrelated to the tile set stuff. You can also do isometric work, but I haven't really gotten into how, to be honest. So now another thing I can show you is that animation we had from before. So where did you go? There's my animation. I can also grab it, and we can drag it into the world. So if we preview, you can see the effect of those animated tiles as well. So that is how you basically compose and paint your level. Stop that preview. We don't really need that running. And that is the world creation aspect of things. Now, how do you actually bring game objects into your world? Well, it's pretty much the same process. Most game objects that you're going to deal with in a 2D game are going to be sprite-based. So you come on in here, you go create. Let's bring in another image. So we'll import. Let's go back up a little bit. Oh, yeah, we'll use that guy. There's our ship. Like so. Now, one of the things you're going to want to do, you're probably going to want to orientate around the middle, especially if you're going to be doing rotations on it. So the first thing we're going to do right here is just go ahead and go middle center. So that makes the pivot point, or when we do manipulations of this particular tile, it will be at its center now. As just before we leave, we shall go ahead and rename this. Now up here, we can also have had this be frames of animation. We could make multiple frames and have an animated sprite. We're not going to in this particular case, but you can see I could add a new frame here, add the sprite in for it, and we can control it all here, and its playback speed up here. Also, does it loop or not? But again, we're not going to deal with that in this particular tutorial. You can also have control over how collisions work. You can do fast rectangles. You can see how it's being calculated there. We could have it precise at pixel level collisions, etc., which is going to slow it down a lot for processing. In this particular case, I'm fine with the fast rectangles as my calculator. All right, so we have a sprite to work with. Now that's just the graphic. We're actually going to want to add this into our game world as something we can add code to. So we're actually going to have to go ahead and create an object for it. So we'll create an object. We will call the object underscore player. So, and you see here you can directly tie a sprite to the object. So we now have our object available. There's a couple of settings you can see here, and then here's the critical part. This is where you can link up the events, the parent, and physics. Now the important part there is events. This is how we are going to add code to our sprite. So we're going to do a very, very simple example in this case, but first let's actually create a sprite. So here is our level, and we want to create the sprite in the instances layer. So instances, we go over to resources, and we just drop. So now we have an instance here. Now you notice something going on. We're not on screen. We're actually being obscured. Well, that's because our tiled layer is above our instances layer. So we can actually just pop that guy down, and then now we'll show up. So that's just Z ordering. So the order that layers appear here is very important for determining what draws on top of each other. But we now have our player object in place. We can move it around in our world. We should be able to move it around in our world. Let's go back to our, oh, I have the wrong layer selected. Let's move it down a little bit here. And now let's actually add a little bit of logic to this guy. So your programming process is going to be bring up the editor. And again, it's this link brings over this event pullout, and you can add an event. Now there's two ways we can go about programming input on this guy. We could either do a step event and basically do all of our programs in there. Think of step event as an update. So every time the game loop runs, the step is done there. So if you wanted to handle all of your events in one place, so you want to do a bunch of, if the player pressed left or if the player pressed right, etc. You want to handle it all together, you could do it in step like that. But what we're actually going to do is in straight up key events, just to make it a little bit easier on myself. And we're just going to handle, so we're going to do one event for left and right, and that, I guess that's the extent of our programming on this particular case. I don't want to be too long. And you see there are differences here. So key down, key pressed, and key up are all slightly different things. Key up is going to have a key down and up event to make that fire. So it's not going to actually fire until you get it up, whereas down is going to fire over and over and over again. So if you want the event to fire multiple times for when it's pressed, this is the one you want to pick. So we're going to do if they press left. And that's exactly what we've done here. And what we're going to do is come down and we want to do update variable. So let's see, where did you go? Or we can do change instance. No, that's changes instance to a different instance. So we want to actually. So we're setting an instance variable, and this guy knows what it's attached to. So it knows it's an instance of object underscore player. And you see here in the variable options, we have got the various different options that we can change. X coordinate, Y coordinate, direction, etc. We're just going to go ahead and change the X coordinate. And if they press left, we're going to -1 it relative to its current value. Otherwise, it would just set the value to -1 and it's going to just pop off screen. And that's about it. We'd want to do the same thing for the key right. So key down right. And there's a whole bunch of other options. So we've also got set animations. We could move things around in different manners, but we'll just keep it with, what did I do over here? Set instance variable. All right, so we'll keep it consistent. Set instance variable, X coordinate, +1, relative. So now we've just wired up code for handling the left and right being pressed. That should probably be enough. Let us run our code. So you hear our sound running, and if I do the left arrow, if I do the right arrow, and that's kind of the gist of how programming works. I could get into a whole lot more detail. The only last thing I'm really going to show you on this one is, let's say, for example, I had actually done that step. So let's do during the step. Here you've got other options that came in. So earlier we did just straight up moved for the one thing. Now what we want to do this time is conditional. So let us find if. So we do an if, and we come down here and say mouse button pressed. So basically it's going to check if the mouse button pressed, I think, yeah, so if left mouse button pressed, then we will go and all right, so what we'll do here is if we press mouse button, we will go to position 0. So here's how you can make slightly more complicated conditional expressions. I'm not sure I actually did this one right. We'll find out in a second. Nope. And you see here's the code it compiled into is wrong. Now keep in mind, I don't do a lot of this visual programming, so I'm kind of making a mockery of this. If expression. Oh, I screwed up my if. See, I don't really like the overall. So if variable is true, set if left mouse. Oh, yeah, I'm screwing up the order here. So you know what? I'll skip away from this. We'll ignore what I'm doing here. But there are more complicated ways you can string together these visual programming cues. I did most of my actual experimentation using the non-drag and drop portion. And the truth of the matter is, most developers I don't think are using the drag and drop programming. I think it's more common to be using the scripting side, but the scripting side is almost identical, as we'll see in a second. So there's your various different things. Now one of the really cool things you could do here though is I can right click this guy, and I can change the event out to a different kind. So if I wanted to instead have it, on key pressed instead of key down, I can go ahead and just change it here and it'll automatically swap that event out. And the other thing you may have saw is I can actually convert it to GML. What this will do is, well, there's the excitement of the code that we've been creating. So really all that the script that we've been doing here is on this particular event, increment the x value by plus equals 1. But now we're controlled by GML. Had that been a more complicated script, such as the one that I mangled over here, so we'll spit that over, see if it can actually convert. So here you also see some of your variables are going to be mangled names, temporary variables. It's going to be a little hard to read at times, but you can at any time convert this over to GML script. So if you want to move or transition away from drag and drop, it is an option available for you. Now let's talk very briefly about the scripting language. The scripting language itself, GML, is kind of like C with no memory allocation. So it's sort of a simplified C. There's no real inheritance or object orientedness in there. Very simple language in itself. And let's just bring up the help. Now, you'll actually find that the help, and the process works exactly the same, by the way. So if I'd, here, I'll show you very, very quickly. I don't want to go through all the rest of the stuff, but create new project. All right. That's just annoying. Let me just fire it up this way. All right. So if we create a new project here, GameMaker, demo scripting. Your process of creating code is exactly the same as it is for drag and drop. So let's go ahead and create an object. It's empty, but as you'll see here, when I go and add an event, so here's the create event for this particular thing. Now I would go ahead and write my GameMaker code. So x plus equals 1 kind of thing. And you see there you've got your syntax highlighting, etc. going on. Now, there is actually no x variable for, oh no, there should be. There are a set of built-in variables that will come with every object. We come on back in. Okay, so that leads us back to the help. So let me just bring the manual back up. Yeah, manual I want. And you see you can embed it directly inside of GameMaker. This is also available 100% on the web if you prefer. So come down here, we'll go to scripting, GML. They've got a full documentation basically on how to use GML, a bit of an overview of how particular things go. And then here's your reference. And this is the part you're really going to want to dig into. And here's where it's very monolithic. Now, a lot of this could have actually been streamlined. There's a lot of functions for dealing with data types where if they've had a better type system, they wouldn't have had to have done that. But for the most part, it's a fairly straightforward. So if we wanted to access the web, you see here you've got straight out functions like URL open. So if on the beginning call we wanted to go ahead and do this, we could have done just here, URL open. We should be getting code completion, I thought, but it should be :/GameFromScratch.com. And you see I'm at a non-standard zoom level and everything looks like crap. So their font scaling isn't perfect by any definition of the word, but so there's the code. So basically when this loads up, it will fire up that particular URL. I don't actually know if this will work. I haven't done anything. The object's empty. I've done enough setup with my game, but let's see what this actually does. Yeah, it does nothing. There's probably more to it than what I'm doing here. So let's switch on back over to the help. Now the nice thing is you'll notice the help is available here as a tab. Now this guy popped up down below because of doing the build. You can get rid of it again pressing that way, or again at any time you can maximize the current editor you're dealing with. But you see here for the controls. So here's what I was talking about with data structures. So there's a lot of functions here for dealing with different data structures that if they had a better object system, you would have had none of this. So this is sort of making up for their lack of a good object system. So you've got built-in, you've got grids, lists, maps, queues, and stacks, which pretty much are like the most common that you're going to be using. You've got matrix math functions over here, audio. So what we did earlier, so if we wanted to play the sound like we did earlier on, we could do audio emitter, or not audio emitter, you'd actually probably want to do audio play. So instead of doing the drag and drop, picking the sound file we used earlier, etc., you would have just used this code. And as you can see, there's pretty well documented on how every particular function works. I never struggle with the documentation at all. I do struggle a little bit with the usability of the editor. The visual programming has never been my thing, so like I said, I didn't get that deep into it. But you see here, the documentation is pretty solid. So come in here, here's your physics. So physics fixtures, forces, joints, etc. And this is straight out just the reference. On top of the reference, you also, again, have that other bit of documentation for the language itself. And you know what? That's probably about it. I don't want to go into a whole lot more detail other than, a straight out tutorial series. But this is GameMaker 2. Now, I can't tell you, contrast it to GameMaker 1. I only used it briefly, but I would say there is definitely a less clunky usability to it. My early experiences with GameMaker were not positive, whereas this is actually something I would use. Now, I do have to keep in mind this is a 2D only, Windows only game development platform with a price tag attached, so it's only going to appeal to a certain niche of the population. But it is what it is. It does what it does well, so you can see why this is used by a lot of people for prototyping games. It has been used to make some very successful indie games, such as let's see, Hotline Miami, Spelunky, at least were prototyped using it. I'm not sure if the final versions were, but a number of different indie games were created using GameMaker, and there's a good reason for that. But if you're breaking outside of their structure, if your game isn't 2D, if the room setup doesn't make sense to you, if GML does not appeal to you, this is not the right choice. But I was actually kind of surprised at how positive my experience was with it. Now, the DPI stuff has been horrible, and I've lost many hours to even just trying to get things to display on screen at times, and the font scaling is atrocious when you scale things up and down. But that's a pretty minor quibble. For the most part, the tools are very polished, the workflow is very solid. The usability, the IDE, is a lot more polished than it was. I hope they get some of that font scaling out. When you work with something like Unreal Engine, they use a very similar kind of look to it, but it smoothly scrolls in and out infinitely. It does a much better job of it. And this is a pretty small thing to fix, but it is a very annoying thing with it. All right, so I'm rambling at this point. That was GameMaker. Not really trying to pass off an opinion of it. It's a very successful program, and it's successful for a reason. A lot of people like it, and I can imagine a lot of people hate it, and I can understand both perspectives. I just wanted to show it to you. So hopefully you had a bit of an insight here. That is GameMaker with a couple of warts on my behalf. I apologize for that programming experience we had earlier. But I hope that I did give you an idea of what GameMaker Studio 2 looks like, and let me know in the comments down below what you think of it. Are you a GameMaker developer? Is this a big improvement over 1.4? Are you, what do you think of the pricing? What do you think of, the way Yo-Yo Games have gone with this? Or are you potentially looking at GameMaker, and did this video change your mind about what you saw? I'm interested. Let me know. Let me know in the comments down below. Hope you did enjoy that. If you did, please do click like, subscribe, all that stuff. And I will see you all later. Cheers. Goodbye.